Warning: the contents of this podcast series often include sensitive subject matter and themes that might not be suitable for all viewers. Potentially triggering issues are discussed, and viewer discretion is advised.
If you or someone you care about are dealing with issues that impact their mental, emotional health, sexual health, or physical safety, please check out the resources linked in the bio or reach out to us directly. We are here to assist you toward emergency care and experts. Prioritize your well-being and sense of safety.
Hello, and welcome back to Shattered Foundations, Reconstructed Self, a podcast where we interview members of the deconstruction community to hear their stories and share them with the world. Here, we dive deeper into the process of deconstructing religion and then reconstructing yourself, who you are, what you believe, and how you are moving forward in rebuilding your personal foundation. I am your host, Tahir Dixon, joined today by my absolutely fantastic podcast partner and co-host, Garnet. How are you this evening?
I'm so good to be here. So grateful for my fabulous host, Tahir.
Oh, I thank you. Glad to have you here as always. Today for episode 4, we have a guest whom, if you're a dedicated listener of the podcast, you should know by now. This is a strong-willed and hard-headed Native American woman who I have been close with for most of my life, my Aunt Patricia Brewer. In my episode, I told you about the subcult of the cult of Christianity in Las Vegas that I attended during my time living with her. Since that time, she has left the church and recently joined the deconstruction community. Today, Garnet and I share the honor of hearing my aunt tell her story in full for the first time publicly.
Our goal in creating this podcast is to capture all of the varying stages of deconstruction. The journey of deconstruction is specific to and nuanced for every single person. So we feel it is in the best interest of the deconstruction community to unpack these experiences. So Trisha, how are you feeling this evening?
Excited, a little nervous because this is the first time I've really opened up about anything regarding, my experiences and stuff.
Yeah, it's definitely nerve-wracking, that's for sure. Before we dig into my aunt's story, I wanted to thank you for taking this time to listen to our podcast. As always, the hope is that there's something in this episode you'll be able to take away from this episode. Make sure you like, share, comment, and click that notifications bell so you're always up to date on the latest episode of Shattered Foundations. We release new episodes every Sunday. And with that, Trisha, Auntie, if you will, would you please tell us your story? What is your experience with religion?
Always been around the church at some point. If it's either the Catholic church, going to the Catholic services with my grandma, or there was a time where my parents tried to go to an Assemblies of God. I think we did that for maybe a few years. We're trying to work out their second marriage, and so they got involved in the Assemblies of God. So that was kind of like my earliest experiences as far as that. And then as I got older, it just kind of, the concept of religion and Jesus has kind of always been floating around there. It wasn't until my oldest sister joined the former church I was in. The church originally was based in Lansing, Michigan. And so then, of course, she kind of introduced me to that church. I was living in Ann Arbor at the time, and then the church was in Lansing, so I would kind of go back and forth. I was about 15 years old when I first attended the service at that church, and then I just started going back and forth. She couldn't really take me back and forth, so that kind of stopped for a year or so, and then I moved to Lansing when I was 19. But religion and Jesus has always been there. We got involved in the powwow circle for a big chunk of my latter middle school years. I think it's always been there. It wasn't until I actually got more involved in the former church I was in where I really learned about religion.
One of the things that I find interesting so far, even having known you my whole life, is I guess I didn't realize that your experience with Emmanuel's Temple went all the way back to when you were 15 years old.
Yep. I would ride with my soon-to-be brother-in-law to church in Lansing. I did that for like 15 to 16, and then I think it stopped after they got married when I was 16. So from 16 to 17, I kind of stopped coming. Some background information about the church. I say cult now, and the reason why I characterize it, well, not just me, but everybody I talk to, characterizes it as a cult is because it's extreme devotion to leadership, extreme control. I mean, they take the do's and don'ts that Paul supposedly wrote to an extreme. I mean, it's skirts and dresses. It's to the point where the first lady, the pastor's wife, was, don't come to church bare-legged. You got to put some leggings on or some stockings. No secular music, no R-rated movies. So when I was kind of going back and forth between Ann Arbor and Lansing, I didn't go to the prom when I was 17 at the high school because I was like, oh, I'm going to make the stance of like standing for Christ, you know, and then so between 17 and 18, I kind of, in the church's eyes, backslid because then I kind of stopped going to the church, began to just, you know, live my life free. That was when my 18th year when I graduated from high school. And then I always laughingly say I had a wild child year from 18 to 19 because I wasn't in the church and I just experienced a little bit of everything. You know, those my little wild child years. You know, it's actually interesting. So the whole reason why I even moved to Lansing, so I officially moved to Lansing when I was 19 and like joined the church wholeheartedly, is because my ex-husband was originally friends with my oldest sister, the one that kind of introduced me to the church. Her and her husband, they were all minority aides for MSU. And so he's kind of always been in the family. I mean, I remember governor of Michigan was trying to take away the Michigan Indian tuition waiver. And so there was like a big protest against it because that's like a federally protected treaty agreement with the state of Michigan. So I was 12 and I did some like little speech thing. And apparently that's when I first met him. And it's like a big joke, like, oh, I knew my ex-husband when I was like 12 years old. Yeah. So, which is also,
he was how old then?
He's 9 years older than me.
Okay.
He had to have been a freshman in college. But yeah, so that's like another thing, sidebar too, about the church is it felt like an arranged marriage. So he was always in the family. Of course, it's like, oh, this young Christian native, and he was always around. His name is Chad.
Yeah, okay.
We're not going to go track him down or nothing like that.
So my mom was like, you know, she was like, you know what? You don't deserve to marry Chad. And she's, you know, basically was like, your lifestyle now that you're doing, it's not worthy of the nice Christian young man that's up there in Michigan State, kind of like a mindset. So I was like, oh man, she's right. Let me get my life together. I'm just this sinful, you know, full of sin and all sorts of things.
And you backslid and...
Yeah, just out of the favor of God. And so I ended up making the decision to move to Lansing when I was 19. And then I kind of joined the church officially. And then that started the time frame of the time that I was in the church. And I was in that church from the time I was 19 to 40.
So you're 19 years old at this point, and this is when you kind of full force jump in. And so what does that look like from that point?
So I jump in full, like deep end into the ministry. I start learning about how to have a relationship with God and kind of all of the being the big theme of the church is being sold out for God. So it's like giving your everything into the ministry, essentially. At that time in Lansing, it got to a point where they're having a service every day. And it's like the official services that were kind of expected for you to attend or you didn't look crazy not coming to was like Sunday morning, Sunday night, and then midweek service. And then they started doing what they called intercessory prayers. And it was more of like, you can come if you can make it. They had a morning one and then like an evening one for people that, you know, if you worked in the morning, you come to the night one. So then it's like, as a college student, because that's all I was doing at that time, it was like, you know, I worked it out with my classes. So it's like I could come to that. So it was like doing all day Sunday, Wednesday, all day Tuesday. And then they started up with like 5:30 prayer on Thursdays. Then it kind of branched out into prayer on Mondays and Saturdays. Because then the pastor's wife, which her title is like First Lady, she was always doing a women's prayer Saturday night. So that was also another thing. So you would come to church Saturday night. So it kind of got to a point where it's like pretty much every day, everything's volunteer based. So you volunteer to clean. I think at that time it was like every 6, 8, 10 weeks, it was your turn to clean. And then the services were long. And then it was like, I wanted to join like the decorating committee. And that was a lot of times projects would go like through the night and we'd be last minute working.
So you say you wanted to join the decorating committee. Was it because you really wanted to undertake that duty, or was it a chance for you to seek some favor with like the heads of the church?
So some background information about the church. They really look at quote unquote your heart. Like, do you have the heart of the vision? And that's why you start finding yourself volunteering for everything. And my oldest sister was on the decorating committee for a time before she got married and started having kids. And it was fun. At that time, everything was handmade. So like that honestly did interest me, but it is the point where there's like a constant underlying pressure to kind of put your all into it. And then I realize now that I'm, I'll just say I enjoy the male companionship, because it's like I'm working, here and there jobs, trying to go to school full time.
Yeah.
And I would, find my coworker attractive, and like, a little situation happened. But every time a situation happens, you have to tell the leadership. So they're also big on like accountability. If you miss a service, you're supposed to check in and let them know. And they say it's not because of control, but it's because of care. They want to make sure that like you're okay, or if you're traveling or you're going out of town, you're supposed to leave a voice message and say, hey, going out of town for these days. So if you don't see us, that's where we're at. You miss a service, then you have to tell why you missed that service. So it'd be like, okay, so I hung out with my coworkers, situations happen. And then out of shame, I was like, oh, I'm not going to church, so that it's like, I wouldn't go to this service. Well, you need to tell why you didn't go to church, which in the world, people have relationships, people.
Yeah.
Romantic attractions all the time.
And even, not even just that, but sexual attractions too. Like, I think your aversion to considering yourself to be a sexual person, I think that comes from your religious experience or your religious trauma, because in the quote unquote secular world, being a sexual person is not necessarily a bad thing. You're an adult, you're more than welcome, you're more than allowed to have any kind of relationship you want with anybody, as long as it's consensual. Whether it's a relationship, a one-night stand, if everybody's consenting, there is absolutely no problem with that. And so if what you wanted to say is you're a sexual person, then that is okay. Do your thing, girl, So
well, it's funny. I was just actually thinking about that today, because it's like, even as I recognize through deconstruction that there is a problem with Christian religion as a whole, there's still, 20 years of experiencing this kind of like very strict and tight control over me. Like, even something as simple as saying that, yes, I am a sexual person, and that's okay. It's even that kind of, I'm still kind of getting used to saying that. It's something I just kind of dawned on me that I'm like, wait, I think I am, because I did start thinking about these situations that happened when I was younger and how it was so frowned upon. And there was a few situations that happened with people in the church. My history was a huge issue with my ex-husband when we first started, because you don't date in the church, you court. So when we first started courting and my sexual history came out, it was like huge. It was to the point where he almost was going to break it off. He couldn't handle it. He didn't want to marry me. And then because I kind of, in thinking that, oh, this is the will of God, I don't want to lose my blessing that the Lord has for me, really tried to persuade him to like still marry me. And it ended up being very not a good situation. It set the stage to almost 16 years of emotional, verbal, some physical abuse within that marriage, because he now felt empowered to hold that over me. And like the first 3 years of my marriage, it was constant, like, tell me about this situation, and I want to know this situation again, and tell me this. And then if the details didn't match up exactly the first time I said it, it would be an issue, and there would be accusations of like, see, you're lying, like terrible toxic
humiliation. It was trying to humiliate you.
Yeah.
Wow.
And at this point, it was because, I had a little bit more of a history than him. So I'm like, how much was it because he just exhibits narcissistic traits, to how much was it that he was jealous it wasn't him? You know what I'm saying? Like, it's just really, really interesting. But it all goes back to the church. Red flag here in the real world, they teach us, look at the red flags. And that would have been like a huge red flag, And the only silver lining I have is my kids. The marriage marriage I was in, and even in the church, it's like, okay, so I have my kids, and that's the only silver lining.
Yeah, because what you were groomed into thinking was a blessing that you were receiving was actually the complete opposite. But you had been so groomed into thinking that it was, that when those red flags started coming up, you just painted them green. You just ignored it because, like you said, you didn't want to lose what you had been promised. And I think you did also talk about him, exhibiting narcissistic traits. And, narcissistic abuse is they knock you down a few pegs. That's how they control you. That's how they make you easier to control. Maybe not even just narcissists, maybe just emotionally abusive people, generally speaking. But yeah, there's like the shame element that Garnet mentioned. There's the control element. There's the jealousy element. And no matter what percentage of what it was, the fact that any one of them were coming into play that were making him behave that way is a problem,
Yeah.
I take it back. I might track him down.
Welcome to the club. We hate Chad.
Just like on a side note, a trend that I noticed that what you're talking about here in your story, this pattern of older people who are adults or who are approaching adulthood being in direct contact and direct relationship with prepubescent children and young teenagers, it's a problem because I see this in a lot of churches where someone who was like 18, 19 becomes friends with someone who's like, 12, 13 years old, and that's not really seen as something that's weird. And then when that 12, 13-year-old, whatever, that when the younger one finally reaches 18, it's like 3 days after their 18th birthday, the wedding is planned. And I find that to be a common thing in a lot of churches. It's really this normalization of grooming. And I'm not saying that that's necessarily what Chad was doing. I don't know their intentions, but I do know that because church and those communities are so insular because they don't trust anyone else, not the secular kids, not anyone else in your peer group. You can only be around people that are like you. What ends up happening is that you get people who are having too close relationships with people who are just far too young for them. So if they're the only one in their cohort, or there's only two other in their cohort, or all of the cohorts are more or less the same gender, then they start looking to connect with other people around them. And so that's a pattern that I see normalized in a lot of churches. And honestly, I feel it's also why they have to have that SAM insurance.
Yeah.
I think that's very true because the whole beginning history of when we first got married, it really was the fact that I was the only native. There was a couple of women in the church, the church is primarily a Black church. It was a couple of women he tried to approach to try to court, and they turned him down. So it's like, well, now here's his friend's younger sister, who's the only other quote unquote saved native, in the church, especially that particular church, because it's another thing. It's frowned upon to go outside of the church to find your mate. And there's I think a good maybe 250 people, maybe 300 now, that are like the hardcore followers of the church, and hardly anyone's married because everyone's afraid to step out of the church to find their mate to get married, or they just grew up with each other within the church where they just don't, it's just not there. But it's definitely interesting that, everyone's still single at this point. But yeah, there was dreams that I had. There was quote unquote signs he had where it's like, oh, this is the will of God. And that has maybe something to do with that, with the fact that it was like, that's all there was.
Yeah. So
when you're courting in the church, you have 2 sessions, pre-marriage sessions with the leaders. And the first one went all right. The second one that you have is the last one before the wedding is coming up. That was when I was honest about well, this is what I'm experiencing. This is what he's doing. He's asking me about my past. I don't think it's appropriate. And we're sitting in this pre-counseling marriage session with the leaders. They're literally asking him why are you doing that? Do you think that's okay? And he's still justifying what he's doing. It's kind of unfortunate because everything is done through the leaders. So it's not really okay to seek any kind of therapy outside of them. You technically can. And they'll put disclaimers on anything. They'll say, oh, we don't say that. And we let people make whatever decisions that they want, which is technically true. But the underlying theme of it all is kind of this blind devotion to them where you completely trust them in every area of your life. So any other non-Christian therapist would be like, well, maybe this isn't working out. Maybe you guys should take a step back. But no, they're like, well, just don't do that anymore. Which he obviously didn't listen because, I mean, we got into a big argument the night before the wedding. And I'm like, I'm getting married tomorrow and I'm in tears because my soon-to-be husband is just continually like almost degrading me at this point, and it just was really unfortunate that that's how they have it set up. Everything is through them because the marriage started off bad. We had the hard times throughout the marriage, and there was times where we probably could have benefited from some kind of marriage counseling, but it was, well, you can go to the leaders and then they know all your business about what's going on, and it's like, oh, let's not tax the leaders. They do enough for the ministry. They put their all into everything. Everything's just just swept under the rug behind closed doors. And it just did not create a good marriage at all until I finally was like, enough is enough,
These meetings with the church leadership, and he was rationalizing that behavior. What did they say?
Basically, they said, don't do that. And that was the extent of it. Then we left and continued on courting, and then we got married.
But he continued to do it.
Yes, unfortunate, because from what I can remember, I do know that pastor's wife tried to kind of stick up for me and say like, well, you shouldn't be asking her that. There's a part of you that shouldn't even want to know, about things, which is funny that I'm devoted to the ministry, because early on, he still didn't even listen to what they said. Right. And I think that's probably another reason why I didn't push marriage counseling while we're having trouble in the marriage, is because he didn't listen to them in the beginning. So why is he going to listen to them now?
Right. Right. Was there ever a point when you were dealing with these issues where you thought that you wanted to walk away from the idea of marrying him?
I think that there may have been some fleeting thoughts, but it was such a mindset of, this is God's will for your life. This is meant to be. Yeah. The signs line up, the dreams line up, everything is lining up. And this is just the devil trying to tear apart what God's trying to build, type of thing.
You could never really even explore that as an option for yourself, as a viable option, because you were so programmed.
Yeah, no, there was a time where, like, to kind of do some more back history, I kind of had, obviously I had issues here and there that kind of got me into like some stern talking tos from the pastor's wife. So the very last situation, she's like, the sin is going to destroy you. The devil's trying to kill you. You got to stop it, basically. And then it just so happened that a few days later is when my ex-husband approached leaders to try to court me, because you're interested in a young lady in the church. You go to the leaders, you ask permission to pursue them. They pray on it, and then they say either yes or no. They don't just say no, but I know of one situation where a young man was trying to pursue a girl in the church, and they're like, well, do you want God's perfect will or do you want his permissive will? And that's kind of like the way they would word it if they didn't think it was something you should pursue. My ex-husband, went to them. So it's basically, she told him to wait, because I was like, okay, I'm going to do right. I took a whole month of like extreme. I fasted every day. I was doing a 100-hour fast, which is basically just pretty much fasting from midnight to 3 p.m. like every day. And then by 7 days, it equates to about 100 hours. So it was like a whole month of this. I'm just going to pour myself into God, and I'm going to get right, and I'm going to be on fire. So I had this whole month of like the shut-in kind of effect, where it was just like really praying and reading and seeking God and fasting. And when I came out of that, it was like, okay, now I'm acceptable to be approached. Because then it was like, he came back a month later and she was like, oh yeah, you can court her. We're more than happy for you guys, to court. So that's what started the actual like courtship. There was a part where it was like, well, that thought of like, oh no, this is never going to happen. After this is something I've always wanted since I was younger. He's always been there in the family. So that's what made me like, okay, well, then just basically put up with it. Kind of just gotta to appease him, really. That's one of my trauma responses
Yeah.
is the fawning. And I probably started it way back then because it was like in the beginning, yeah, we kind of had a very contentious marriage, and he would almost step to the line of like getting physical, and that kind of scared me. So it would like pull me back. But yeah, it kind of went from like that fawning of, well, you know, you are wrong. He's right. You're full of sin, and, you know, you need to do right. Because then another thing that the church likes to perpetrate is be like First Lady, the pastor's wife. She was pure until she got married, never smoked anything, never drank anything. She was just like the most perfect as you can get person, you know, religiously. She often talks about how she was a stay-at-home mom, but she cooked and cleaned, and the house was nice when the pastor came home from work. So it was this constant ideal of like, this is the ultimate pedestal. This is where you want to be at, you know, to be the ultimate, like what they say is daughter of destiny is the big thing, is to be just like First Lady. So it was like a constant pressure of like, well, let me just work through this because I want to be just like her, you know, and I want to have a marriage like them. And it just, yeah.
So what I'm hearing is you decided that because you weren't worthy, you needed to take a month of starving yourself, breaking yourself down, bringing down your self-worth even to get to the point of where they say, okay, she's good to go?
Well, I mean, that's kind of the after effect. But when I first started it, it was to kind of like, let me get that stronger relationship in God, because obviously I'm making decisions that's not pleasing to him. So initially started out as just like trying to get to that point of a really good relationship in God.
Do you know what their standard was that they used to determine what were good matches and what weren't?
You know, I really don't know. I mean, with the situation that I know of where the guy tried to go and they're like, well, do you want God's perfect will or permissive will? I think it was because she also, I think maybe she had maybe one too many situations where they're like, oh, you should marry her. But what's funny is they ended up having a situation with each other, which resulted in an unplanned pregnancy, and they had to get married anyway.
Oh, wow.
So, you know, I think that maybe back then they were a little bit more stricter. I think now because no one's getting married and it's kind of making the church look weird, because there's been a couple of people that have gone out of the ministry to find their mates and brought them into the church. But yeah.
The reason that I'm asking is because so many of people's life's decisions come down to the thoughts and opinions of these people, and you know, like you said, they pray on it and but I'm wondering how much of it is Christianity and or religion based, or how much of it is just their own personal opinions, which is insane to have that much power to dictate people's lives like that.
Yeah, I mean, I still wonder. I go back and forth when I think about them as leaders, because there are things that they do that just make me wonder, are they really aware of how much control that they're putting over the people? Or is it they're that like delusional where it's like, we really feel like this is what God said? You know, I kind of go back and forth because it is kind of interesting. The book coming out as far as the young lady, her experiences with that.
The sexual assault allegations, right?
Yeah. So I'm trying to think, it maybe was just a few years when we actually moved to Vegas. It's just kind of stuff like that. Like, you know, I didn't even put the two and two together about them moving out to Vegas because of that allegation until the book was already out. I think the book was being written maybe 1 or 2 years prior anyways, before the book actually got released. So maybe they did know, but the timing of it, I could see that happening. So I still kind of go back and forth with, do they really know what they're doing, or are they just so in this kind of unrealistic
religious psychosis?
Yeah. So I do wonder, really. They were playing a game one time. One of the questions was to the pastor, if you weren't a pastor right now, what would you be doing? And his response was he would be a psychologist, because he's really into like the mind and how it works. So that, I don't know. I think about his response to this day, because so some more history about the church. They believe that they've been called to the office of prophets. He calls himself a prophet. His wife calls herself a prophetess. So a big chunk of their ministry is prophesying on people and like calling people up for words and stuff. And now that I've been out of that ministry for like 3 years now, I go back and I see things that are said, and it's almost like it's so ambiguous. Like it's a lot of times, or it's the same people getting the same kind of words the more you get into being 100% in the vision and you rely on the leaders, the more open you are. So, whatever you're experiencing, it's like whatever heartache or situation or trying time you're experiencing, you'll call and leave a message, and then she gets it and listens to it. And you just have faith that, oh, she's sitting there praying about it. But there'll be times where people got words about something that they just left a message on, and the past, and the first lady would say like, oh, I didn't tell him. Did I tell you? No, I didn't tell you.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm like, I don't know, it's just, but that part, if you're able to put off that kind of front, then you very well do know what you're doing. Like,
Yeah,
it is.
right.
In my situation, I got my first word when I was in Lansing when I was like 16 years old.
Wow.
And I think back to what he said, and I listened to it so much over the years, I can almost quote it word for word. But even then, it's nothing specific to me. It's something that,
Right.
kind of can be said to almost anybody about any situation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Or, I will say this, especially in those closed religious circuits like the one that you were in, when you are a leader that has set the church up in such a way where people are coming to you, they're telling you what their problems are, they're telling, so you're aware of who they are as people, what are their challenges, what are their tendencies? So for me, I just read that as, when people talk about those fortune tellers that just kind of throw out these open-ended things and they wait for, they're like picking up on the nonverbal cues. It's kind of like that. They may or may not be consciously thinking like, how do I weave together a prophecy that does, it might not be conscious for them, or it may, but the point is, because of the dynamic that's set up, they don't have to be conscious of it, because they have so much already on everyone that what they are saying or attributing to be the word of God is actually just the amalgamation of all the things they know of this person, and then being able to sort of accurately predict some kind of future. But that, in a sense, it's predictable given someone's behavior. Like what we know about their behavior, what are they most likely to do? What is most likely to become manifest in their life based on all of the things that we already know about them.
Mm-hmm. It's cold reading.
Yeah.
Is a set of techniques used by mentalists, psychics, fortune tellers, and mediums. Without prior knowledge, a practiced cold reader can quickly obtain a great deal of information by analyzing the person's body language, age, clothing or fashion, hairstyle, gender, sexual orientation, religion, ethnicity, level of education, etc., etc. So these kinds of people use this technique in order to, I guess you could say, trick the person into thinking that what they're telling them is true. And imagine if this person who's doing a technique like this or this technique already knows you, knows the most intimate things about you, and like you said, what you're going through, at that moment. So yeah, it wouldn't be very hard, whether consciously or subconsciously, to know, especially if you're interested in psychology, how to manipulate people, really, honestly, is what it comes down to.
Well, some of the stuff he's said over the years is so for instance, one of my old church friends had just had her baby, and he told her husband to come up and shout because God's going to give you a son. So, I was standing next to her and I'm like, oh, God is good. And then she's like, yeah, God is good. However, I had a partial hysterectomy because she almost she started bleeding and they couldn't stop the bleeding. So she almost kind of, unalived on the table in the operating room. But in order to stop the bleeding, they had to take away part of her uterus. So I'm like, how is she going to carry a child if she's missing half her uterus?
Yeah.
And did she?
Wow.
No, she didn't.
Oh my gosh.
Have a baby. So my ex-husband's already remarried. We officially got divorced in 2023. By November 2024, he was getting married. So he's remarried already. I believe now she's 52. He's 50 or 51. They got a word that she was going to have a baby. The pastor told my ex-husband that he's got to have one more kid because she has to give her family a grandchild. But I'm like, she's 52. Unless they use IVF, it's not going to happen naturally. Or the chances of it happening naturally, biologically, is so rare,
Right.
So it's just situations like that. Or there is another couple that used to be a close friend of mine, got multiple words of having a child, and she had a lot of health issues, female health issues, where she probably could have had a child if she sought IVF, but it's frowned upon to not do something without faith. You kind of don't question what they say or their leadership in any way. Because it's like you go to them for mental health therapy, you go to them, for prayers for healing.
Yep.
People could have gotten married if they went outside the ministry, or they could have had kids if they
Mm-hmm.
saw teachers that could help them have kids, but it's not really encouraged, I guess.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, I even felt the need to go to leadership to ask, I had a tubal ligation. I felt the need to ask them for permission to do that procedure, so
To your
that's
own
how,
body.
yes, they really perpetrate this fear of getting rebuked, fear of
Mm-hmm.
upsetting or displeasing God, because it's such a mindset of we're God's chosen vessels. So you have to trust that what we're doing is in your best interest because we feel this is what God is saying. But it's translates into every area of your life. I mean, I've asked permission to cut my hair before because I didn't want to cut my hair too short. And then I get rebuked by the pastor's wife, because you will get called up very quickly. Come here, dear. What happened? Why'd you cut your hair? You didn't tell me you were going to cut your hair. Because that's what happened to my sister.
Wow.
I seen it happen to my oldest sister. She cut her hair. She got called up, got questioned. Yeah. So seeing now as I look back at my experiences, that's why it's easier for me to say now, yeah, you're in a cult. Because that's not normal. That kind of extreme devotion and unquestioning, that's not
and control for that matter.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But I've gotten so many words and it's none of it really came to pass.
Right. That is so insane. Taking it back a little bit, so you're in the church in Lansing, you and Chad get married. Can you bridge the gap between when you got married to moving out to Vegas when they started the new branch of the congregation?
Yep. I had my daughter 2007. By the fall of 2007, they had made an announcement okay, God told us we're going to start another church. And they told us they're going to start another church somewhere. It was a couple of months before they actually told us where. So the service that they said, we're going to open up a church in Las Vegas, Nevada, was a huge thing. Everyone got all super excited. And then November is when they officially said, okay, we're doing the official mass exodus. So it was 75% of the church moved out to Vegas with the leaders in November. And we officially moved to Vegas March of 2008. But that time frame, it was you watch people kind of, the services that we had prior to that, it was service every day. It was a very routine. Everybody knew how things were going to go. And then leaders were there. So it was come to show face. You come to get favor from leaders by seeing you in the services. So when they actually left and it kind of became the services were different, people stopped coming. And it was this fear. I remember when ex-husband came home from work and he's like, you know what, we're going to move. I feel basically we're not going to make it as far as religiously, we're not going to make it in the church if we don't move to Vegas, which probably is true. Our marriage probably wouldn't have survived, not being in the church. If we had left, the church was probably the only reason why we were still together at that point. So yeah, so he came back. He said he talked with a faculty member at the college because he was in the middle of getting his doctorate degree in history from Michigan State. And he was like, hey, if I'm there in the city, can I get an interview to teach part-time at the college? And the faculty member said, yeah. So he flew out there, got a job, and we just pretty much picked up and moved to Vegas, packed up our stuff, drove cross country, and moved to Las Vegas. And that's what started living in Vegas from 2008 until I left in 2022.
Wow. And do you remember the reason that they said that was going to happen?
Other than just, this is what God said. They had different cities that they were praying on, but they ended up going out. Oh, I think it was a wedding. We went out there there was a couple that was getting married and wanted to get married in Las Vegas. I forget the reason why. So we all went out there for the wedding. And I don't know if that's the first time that they kind of looked at the city and was like, looks like a good city. And I think that's kind of what planted the idea of let's pray on it and see if God leads us to move to Las Vegas. So that's what God said.
Okay. And then you guys move out there and you said after that is when you find out about the allegations through the book.
Yeah, I wish I could remember the exact time frame, but it had to all been within a couple of years, maybe within 5 years from the time, because I think the book took a minute actually coming out, because I think her brother does a preface about how she was writing this, and then she got ill and stopped writing, and then he kind of picked it up to finish the book on her behalf. So that itself was maybe 2 or 3 years time frame. So I would say within 5 years of, because then the book came out, and I think it was maybe within 5 years of us being out there in Vegas, I think the book had come out at some point.
Okay.
That's when it was officially published. There's a lot of stuff behind the scenes regarding that book that, could have came out that, we didn't know about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
But you know what? I do know that, like, there's so many things that we're not privy to. They're very close. Most churches, especially churches that try to have multiple churches, usually have a board to kind of keep accountability. A lot of the major churches have it, like Church of God in Christ, Assemblies of God.
Yeah.
They have boards. They don't believe in boards because they don't want to be told by somebody else how to run their church.
sure.
But so, even financial. So they started a school, but it's really just a homeschooling co-op. And it's just a way to make the kids feel like they're not missing out on actual school like experience. And so we get charged a tuition to get, well, not we anymore, but at the time they were charging tuition to the parents for the curriculum. They ended up having to use an online curriculum because, they're not a real school. So they don't have any of they're not like licensed. But even the tuition, it was like, well, we're going to feed the kids twice a week. We're going to give them hot lunch. So we're going to upcharge a little bit to the tuition. But when I left, I did my own research and I called the school and I'm like, yeah, I'm looking, I just kind of played it off. I was like, I'm looking to get one of my kids to the school. How much is tuition? And there was kind of a slight difference between what the actual school charges for their curriculum to what the church was charging for the tuition. So I'm like, they're kind of making a good, like, I did some just basic math. They're making a good, like, 10 grand a month, extra for tuition. And it's like, even if they were feeding the kids, I don't really see them spending $10,000 worth of food a month.
No.
Yeah.
So if, despite, what any other issues would have been that prompted them to God to tell them to move the church to Las Vegas, wasn't it initially that you had the church home where you guys were going to be, but wasn't it that you guys were supposed to get a bigger place or something?
Oh, as far as the building?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. Lots of words about this is just a stepping stone and we're going to build a place. Because in Lansing, they did build their own church. Again, it was like they always say, oh, we built this $10 million church debt free. But that is very true. They did not take out any financial loans or anything for that church. It was from the backs of the people, essentially. It was not a mega church. So we're not talking about thousands of members. It's like at most maybe 300. So at some point between, I think maybe it took them like 8 years or something like that for them to build a church. It was like, yeah, they raised that much money to build it debt free. Then again, is it really debt free? At this point, everything I know about the church history, there is a question mark at the end of it because it's like we're not privy to a lot of stuff and we're told, this is how things are painted this way. But I'm like, is that just the facade? Is there a whole darkness behind the painted light? It's just really interesting.
And it was grand. It was beautiful. It really was, the building in Lansing. And
oh yeah, they had imported nothing but the best. So like imported marble from Italy. Yeah, real grand. They had this huge chandelier like in the round rotunda area. And
then picked up and left that church.
Yes. No wonder they didn't feel bad about it because it was the people paid for it. So it's
man.
It's not like they were having to pay a bank.
They didn't put in the same sweat equity.
Yeah.
They didn't put in the same efforts that everybody else did.
Yeah.
Man. So you guys move out to Vegas. Within the first few years, the accusations come out, and I'm sure they were brushed under the rug, right? Don't listen to these. These are lies, like that kind of thing.
No, they actually never officially addressed the book coming out, but in his preaching, he would be like, people can say whatever they want about us, but it's because we're called and we're chosen and we have God's favor. And of course, they're going to talk about us. And they talked about Jesus too, and we're followers of Jesus. So yeah, there definitely was nothing specifically said, but definitely like people are going to talk about us.
On the martyr complex.
Yes, the martyr complex.
Yeah.
I think maybe below we should link the book so they can look into that. Editor's note, the book is linked in the description below. I don't want to speak on her experience and what happened. That's a story for her to tell. She's a very brave woman who has since passed away. May she rest in peace. And trigger warning, but if you're able, I think that in honor of her bravery, we should hear her out and listen to her story, and I hope that you will. Thank you. So that's her story. Knowing even what we know now, just in the context of this conversation, these clearly aren't the most trustworthy people.
Yeah.
Just saying. So they have this small building that they're supposed to upgrade. Still to this day, they're in the same building, right?
Yeah. Although they did remodel it, and I guess it's like super nice looking. But again, everything is donations. So, and that's like another thing about the church and the leaders is like there's only specific designer labels that are acceptable gifts to them. There's a few select families that were chosen are the ones that have proven not to question anything. I realize now it was always kind of said in a way of like, we know that you guys aren't going to be saying nothing negative because people do question things, but we're the ones that just love leadership. And so it was like orchestrated by the pastor's daughter who's like super involved in ministry. And basically we all banded together and raised money to lease a Bentley that was like pastor's like dream car. And we raised enough money to have them lease this car for, I think we paid like 2 or 3 years. It ended up being like 250,000. So he could drive this Bentley around, you know, but we're doing that to get favor from God for showing love and support to the pastor.
Oh man, what a gross manipulation of people's devotion to God. So we're talking about finances, and that was one of the things that I do remember was kind of discussed within our family. And so if you think about it, you move out to Vegas, none of them work, right? The pastor, his wife, his daughter Rachel, his son, none of them work, right?
No.
So any payment that they're getting is from what, the tithes of the church?
It must be tithes, offerings. You see it in the Pentecostal church. Maybe not just Pentecostal, but the tithing thing. You know, a lot of churches are big on tithes. The First Lady has said multiple times, doing tithes is bare minimum. Like you should be giving tithes and offerings every time. So that's like another big thing that they push is like give. You know.
And for tithes, what was the percentage of your income you were expected to give?
Oh, it's 10% of your gross pay, which can be a big difference when you look at all the stuff the government takes out.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so that's 10% of the gross income of how many people would you say were in the church in Vegas?
At least 250 now. I mean, there might be more now that a lot of the kids are up and coming and considered adults that I remember. So it might be, you know, up to maybe 300.
Okay, so that's one revenue stream. And then they're still connected to the church in Lansing, right? So same thing there. And the numbers dwindled. You said 75% moved to Vegas. Do you remember about how many were left in Lansing?
Oh, yeah. There's maybe about 40, if that is like here in Lansing to this day. It's been a while since I've been to a Lansing service, but yeah, it's pretty much down to that, if that. I would say even maybe 20 people at this point. There's a lot of people that left in Lansing.
Which is just, especially now in my head, seeing that church, that's, wow, 20 people. Man, they could probably fill the, like you said, the veranda of that church and be okay.
Oh, the rotunda?
Oh, the rotunda, yeah.
Actually, and they don't even have service in the sanctuary. That sanctuary is like closed down. I mean, when we visited the church, the deacon that kind of helps run the stuff there, like let us, you know, he'll open the doors and he'll turn the lights on and let us see the sanctuary for the former glory it was. But yeah, services is actually in what's called that multi-purpose room where it's like this, like, oh, actually do you remember where we had the reception at for my wedding? That's where church is now. And it's really at this point, it's just them watching the live stream of the Vegas service.
Wow.
Is what church is how the services are now in Lansing, you know. And every now and then they used to try to go back once a month, but I don't even think they go back once a month. It might be once every couple of months. They still try to like go back to Lansing, you know, in some kind of frequency.
Yeah, if they didn't ever go back, would the 20 people still stay? You know, who knows?
I think the fact that so many people left right after, well, one, I feel like I hope that their eyes were opened with the whole allegations thing. But like, even if that never happened, for me, it just kind of shows how much it really is like a personality fandom thing. Like when the personality is gone, it's just a very empty experience. Like people aren't getting that sort of spiritual recharge that they thought they were getting while the leadership was there, because when the leadership moved, it's like done. It's like gone for them.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, you're so right.
Yeah,
Because
personality cults.
yeah,
Personality
exactly.
cults.
And you know what? I know a lot of people, like I've been in there so long that a lot of the people that have left, a lot of them openly criticize the church and they share their experiences that they had while at the
Good.
church. I was actually telling Tahir the other day, these years of watching people like, oh, backslide, and then they talk about the leaders. It is kind of like, oh, I would never, share my experiences. There's nothing to share. They're great people, but it's like I see now why they were very open in sharing, because once you kind of wipe the fog off your glasses and you see like, no, your experiences are very real. So it's very validating where it's like, it's not okay. But I always used to wonder, everyone would kind of have the same kind of criticisms about the church. And it's like, I see now, here I am.
Yeah.
Doing the same. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
I'm glad you made it out.
But, that is unfortunately the other problem with not even just that church, but these kinds of churches that have that level of, that are like closed and have those talons of control and like the guilt and the fear, all of that's how families become separated, because she's free, she got herself out, but her kids are still stuck there, So it's like bittersweet from that standpoint. So 10% from all the people in Vegas, 10% from the few in Lansing, and then you add in eventually the school tuition. And so it starts to, even without knowing actual numbers, the numbers start to add up and it becomes a pretty decent amount of money. They're still in the same place. Like you said, sure, they renovated eventually. The reason that I'm asking all of these questions is because you think of the monthly, yearly income that they've been bringing in since you said you moved to Vegas in 2007.
Mm-hmm.
Where does it go?
2008.
2008, sorry. Where does it go? Where is it?
Oh, I know. And actually, I know for a fact there are multiple people that by now are making six figures. So 10% of a six-figure income, that's pretty cushy amount too, monthly. We're talking paycheck wise. So it all depends on if somebody's getting paid bi-weekly, getting paid monthly. That's 10% of that paycheck. There's people that have really good paying jobs. And they do dress very nice because it's like Mother's Day, Father's Day, their anniversary, and their birthday. It's always a special thing for the kids' birthdays, too, the 3 children. So it's like kind of constantly giving, in a sense.
Gifting. Because I was just wondering if you felt the upgrades that you've seen is maybe where that money went, or if it's still just a big question, where is it? You said, they feed the kids a couple times, a week. Okay, that's where some of the funds go. Whatever it takes to keep the building, whether or not they own it, that whole thing. Oh, and then they pay themselves, right? Because that's their job. That's where their income comes from. And so I was just wondering if there's some kind of explanation, or if it's still just, it goes where it goes and nobody knows.
Yeah, it goes where it goes and nobody knows. I now personally think that a lot of it does go to them and their kids, because no one in their family is hurting for anything. And none of them work outside of the church. The oldest son, everybody, it's that whole mentality of like, we give our whole 100% into the vision, the work of the ministry type of thing. So it's like their children are ultimate like pastors' kids, where it's like their whole life is their parents and their parents' work. They get paid pretty nicely. I mean, they all drive nice cars, all live in nice areas. We don't know. We don't question. We just keep giving.
Yeah. Well, because, and then the trips as well. You guys as a church go on lots of trips, which you guys are all supposed to fund yourselves. But where does their trip money come from?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So even like with the banquets, like I know you were there a couple of times for like the senior banquets. Again, another thing is, no R-rated movies, no secular music, no proms. In order to have the kids not feel like they're missing out on that whole, big event, they put on what's called the banquet, where everyone dresses up all super nice, and they have a dinner, and they usually do like, they give awards to the kids for the school year and stuff. But that, we pay for that. Now it's like, it's done at a banquet hall in Vegas somewhere. So
We the people?
yeah, we pay for everything. We pay for, like,
Oh.
when there's events that are put on, we pay for that. When there's trips, we pay for that. So the silver lining with the church is they do like the travel. So I have had the opportunity to see a bunch of places around the world, which is nice, because I always joke around and say, like, London's like my favorite place in the world. And with the church, it's like no cussing, no drinking, no smoking. Everything is very the don'ts. And it's like, well, I want to go to a London pub, so I gotta go back to London.
Yeah.
The city truly for what it offers.
Right.
And even that was hard, because some of the trips, the group got split up, and if you weren't lucky enough to be in their group, you just got pushed to the side. So the London trip in particular was a trip where we didn't get to travel with them. Everything was done, like, we didn't even do the same things as they did. It kind of makes you feel like, it does mess with your psyche a little, like, well, why didn't we get to be picked to be in their in group? Why didn't we get to be picked to be on the bus? And that's why I was telling Tahir, actually, towards the end, before I left, I kind of was getting to a point, what was happening maritally, I was trying to fawn and appease to be able to try to maybe help our marriage. So in my mind, doing that, let me try to just put everything into the ministry. So it was like, I was volunteering at the kids' school. That's another thing. You don't get paid for teaching at the school, but you get a tuition discount. So we got like a $200 discount off of tuition. Maybe it was 300 because we had 3 kids. So, that was our payment. So I was, instead of working a job, I was volunteering at the school. So I would help at the school. And then when holidays came up, like Easter or Christmas, and they did like a production with the kids, they needed volunteers for that. So it was like volunteering for that. So it just took a toll on me, because it was being at the school all day, running home, trying to feed my kids, trying to help them with their homework, which the curriculum that the school chose, it's very fast paced. It's online, and not every child works good with online programs. My son has like been struggling since they switched programs, but it was like trying to help him with the school, then run back to the church to help, for these productions. And it was a lot. So I think because I was doing a lot with the ministry, it kind of maybe showed a little favor in their eyes or whatever, because we actually got invited to go on one of the, like, every now and then they'll take like secret trips with just a few select people. And we actually got chosen to be in one of their select quiet, hush trips to, I think we went to Washington, D.C. And it was like, emails were like, don't say anything. This is just for us.
Wow.
But this is what we're doing.
Wow.
So yeah, even when I left, they did try to reach out. The pastor's wife tried to reach out a couple times. The pastor's daughter tried to reach out when I left. And one of the things she did say was like, I thought we were getting close. I thought you were like my sister. You can talk to me about anything. That type of response. Like,
Right.
yeah.
And it's also not a two-way dynamic. Like, when you're sisters with someone, you're both sisters with each other. But that's not the way that the leaders aren't necessarily opening up to you guys about, what are my trials and tribulations right now? And, I sinned and I did this. Like, they're not doing that. It's like a very much a one-way dynamic where you guys go to them, they take it to God, and then they sort of bridge that absolution and like the absolving. Like, that's not a sisterhood.
No, so true. That's such a one-sided relationship. I mean, with Minister Rachel, their daughter, was it that same thing where you were feeling like you were needing to divulge a lot of information, but not necessarily having her do the same thing?
No, there's definitely a dividing line, because she always tries to say, like, I am not first lady, like, don't tell me your business. She's got her very core group of friends that probably do talk about all types of stuff. And then it kind of branches out to like her sister friends, where it's like a lot of the other married women, or, a lot of the like devout followers of the vision and the leaders and stuff. And like, I think the only reason why we got invited to that trip is because they were going to the Native American Museum in Washington, D.C. And so they're like, oh, let's have the natives come on the trip to go to the Native American Museum. And.
Right.
Wow. So in this case, it's a very surface level relationship other than like the church and all of that, right? Because if you're not supposed to tell her your business, she's certainly not going to be telling you her business, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh,
So
yeah.
how can you say that you have a sister relationship with somebody that is so surface level? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. It's almost like you're just so excited that she's even like counting you close like that, that you don't, you're just,
Yeah.
that's enough for you. Like, I remember one of the nights I hung out with them and we went to a restaurant, we ate, and then just kind of walked around Washington, D.C. But I remember at that time thinking, like, this is it. Like, this is the greatest experience, just to be able to hang out with Minister Rachel and her people. And I came back and I was all excited and I was talking about the night with my ex-husband. And but it was like, I just remember feeling like so elated that, wow, I get to have this time. And then you come back and then people know you went on a trip. You know, you got people kind of looking funny because it's very hard. Like, I know as a parishioner in the church, when they go away on trips and you see the people that get to leave with them, it messes with your psyche where it's like, again, like, why didn't I get picked this time? Or, what's wrong with me? But then when it's the opposite and you are one of the ones that get to go and you come back, now you have to deal with people looking at you like, well, what makes you so special? Why did you get to go?
Yes, and that sort of using, there's a term for that. It's like social triangulation, where they sort of pick and choose the favorites. And it also provides just a little bit of table scraps to people who they might feel, yeah, I want to reward this one with, or I am worried about this one. Yeah, the stars are in their eyes now, kind of thing.
Yeah, it's so funny you say that because so my mom passed away in 2011. And because I did not have a good marriage, my ex-husband, he didn't know how to be comforting. It was like we couldn't afford for all of us to go. Obviously, it's my mom. So I went back to her, her funeral, did all that, seen the family, and came back. And it was like no support. It was like the mom thing, the house thing, it caused a rift to the point where I was like, I miss my family. So I called my sister, Tahir's mom, told her I want to take my kids. I want to go back. I want to leave. She had my stepdad get on a flight and he was going to help me drive back. I made the mistake of saying something that night because we kind of got into it and I just was itching to like kind of just hit him, I guess, emotionally hit him because I was just not feeling supportive in anything. I just didn't feel close. There was like no emotional connection like whatsoever. And he ended up calling. If you have an emergency, you call the church's line and you push the emergency button and then the operator connects you to like, I'm assuming one of their cell phones. So he called the phone, called the emergency, was talking to pastor. And so they knew that I was trying to leave. Well, that night, the pastor's wife calls me and she's like, hey, let's go out to eat. I want to take you out to go eat, just be you and me. So she took me out to eat the next day. We went to breakfast. I came back and I had to sit in the office with pastor and his wife. And, they're kind of like trying to do the whole counseling thing. And, it was awkward because it was like, I couldn't really, like the physical abuse I kind of experienced in my marriage, never told anybody because it was like, I didn't want them to know that, and it's kind of like, it's just such a stigma of having issues in your marriage and having to seek help from them to get through. I know one of my friends that I still kind of talk to that left the ministry too, she's had multiple marriage sessions that just never went anywhere to where she's like, I can't do this. And, she ended up leaving her husband and left the ministry. And kind of a joke between her and a couple of my other friends, we're like in the divorced wives club because we're all like, we kind of all left the ministry. Now we're divorced. But yeah, it was really hard. But it was funny that, she took me out that day. And then I think the next week I went out again because then she was like, oh, we should have Minister Rachel, her daughter. We should all go out to eat. So then, they took me out to one of the super fancy hotels out in Vegas, one of their, their buffets and stuff. Spent that time with me, but it was perfect timing. It wasn't like it was just some random, like, what, the Lord laid you on my heart to take you out to eat. It was like kind of a motivating thing. And even when they were talking to me about, they weren't even asking me about what are you feeling that's causing you to want to make this decision. It was more of like pleading, like, you don't want to tear up a family. You don't want to make this decision. It's not going to be good, like spiritually. You don't want to make a decision that's going to pull you out of the favor of God or, slash the ministry. Because it's such a frowned upon thing. Anytime anybody leaves the ministry, it's like, oh, you left God, you left your salvation, type of thing. In the Old Testament, when they talk about the plagues, the houses when they had to put the blood over the doors of the
Mhm.
house to be saved from,
Yep.
death. That's what they say about the vision. Like, oh, this is a safe place. And as long as you're in here, with the blood of the lamb, then nothing's going to happen to you. You're safe. They really kind of push that vision as far as the ministry.
Wow. The fact that they likened it to that is like wild to me because
Yeah.
it's like this
Yeah.
threat against your kid.
Yeah.
Wow.
Because, I
Wow.
mean, yeah, it's one of those things where it's like eventually you stop thinking about what that story is actually talking about and it becomes something completely different.
Yep. So we've talked about like just the setup, the aesthetics, like the social dynamics, just like the personality cult things of it. How much do you remember about, the kinds of messages that were coming from the scriptures? When do you get to a point where you start kind of questioning these stories that I'm reading about for myself or hearing about from the pulpit? Like when do you kind of start questioning that?
So when you're in that environment, you don't. You
Mm,
just take whatever pastor says as the word of God and whatever he says as his interpretation of the scriptures as like that's what God meant. So there's a few of his favorite scriptures he does from the Old Testament, but he does a lot of New Testament preaching. So a lot of like Paul's writings he pulls from. They're not one of the churches that are big on the like the faith churches, the faith movement. They're more of like your walk with Christ, a big emphasis on the ultimate devotion, like, your heart, mind, body, soul, everything to God. But ultimately, it does kind of boil down to what he says is what is. And so there's been times where I've maybe seen something that, a little hair back my neck, like, wait, something's not. And it's like, nope, that's the devil. He's trying to get you out of the
okay.
ministry. That's doubt. That's a spirit of doubt. The church is big on reading the Bible. There's been a couple of times where it's like, oh, First Lady's reading the book from Genesis to Revelations and in a year's time. So jump on it, with her and read the whole Bible in a year with her. I never had the capacity to keep up with that. So I never completed that type of challenge. But yeah, reading it, it's like I've read the Bible. I can't say every chapter from Genesis to Revelations, but a huge chunk of it I'm very familiar with. But any kind of thought I have on the scriptures or any kind of what I think the scripture's saying, unless you're able to kind of bring it to the leaders to kind of see what they think, which is it is like almost impossible to like get a hold of them. I mean, back in Lansing, First Lady used to stand up after every service and you could stand in line and like talk to her about whatever it is you want to talk about. You used to be able to do that in Lansing, but once they moved to Vegas, especially now, it's after COVID, it really shut that down. Because even before COVID, you used to be able to kind of stand in line and ask her stuff. Now it's like, nope, unless she calls you or if it's like a holiday or a birthday or you giving them a card, you can't really talk to her anymore. So it's like it's hard to even have that conversation with leadership. So you have to completely rely and have faith that pastor's interpretation of scriptures is like that's what it means. So you really don't question at all.
I noticed that a lot of the conversation is really less about the specifics of the doctrine. So, how important was reading the doctrine?
It's a very good question. My oldest sister, who her husband was a minister in the church and they ended up leaving too, they left about a couple years after the church moved to Las Vegas. But she ended up giving me some books on spiritual mind control. And I think that that's the key with this particular church. And maybe that's why, maybe there's a part of me that feels like he really knows what he's doing as opposed to really honestly being like state of delusion, because you are encouraged to read the Bible. But at the same time, you're not encouraged to question what you're reading if it's contrary to anything he ever says. I don't even think anybody would be bold enough to even go to him and say, hey, you interpreted the scripture this way. I interpreted this way. What do you think about that? I don't think anybody would even be bold enough to ask him that unless it's someone who already left the ministry.
Right.
So yeah, I really think that it's definitely more, you try to put on this like absolute relationship with God more to look favorable to them. Really think that's what it boils down to. And yeah, they try to say they want you to have a relationship with God, but I really think that it goes back to kind of more of that like spiritual mind control type of thing.
Yeah. Wow. That's really fascinating. Because, like, when I listen to you both speak about this experience, like, the only thing I can compare and contrast it to is obviously just my own personal experience with indoctrination and the Christian programming. And even just from where I'm sitting, it's like there are a lot of similarities, especially when it comes to like the inappropriate crossings of age groups. But there are also some pretty stark differences where there were people that would question the text. For example, in our church, we had the board of elders. So I find that to be very common in churches where you have like more of these long-standing members. And because churches are nonprofits, they have to have a board anyways. And so I think that's kind of how it just gets woven into the religious structure of the church, because you need to have a list of board members. So I find it fascinating that they didn't have a board. My church growing up non-denominational, that was a big no-no, because you needed to have some kind of council of elders that would weigh in on decision making and would have consensus on decision making. And they were pretty much the only ones who could admonish the pastor if they saw something that was like wrong or out of line. So the fact that these people have no oversight but Jesus Christ himself, it really is a recipe for disaster. And what I'm hearing from the both of you is that this leans more towards the personality cult. They tap into the doctrine enough to keep people tethered to the idea of Jesus, the sacrifice, the concepts of sin, right? But is less about their personal relationship to the doctrine, and it's more about their personal relationship to the leadership who is interpreting the doctrine for them. And the role of the collective is to make sure that they are sort of embodying the devotion that really would be reserved in most other churches for Jesus and for like God, embodying that and expressing that to the leadership so that the leadership can go on their behalf. It's almost like they've set themselves up as sort of this necessary middleman while feeding you the illusion that it's your own personal relationship.
Yeah.
That is some nasty work.
That is super fascinating that you say that, because they will disclaim every service. They're just workers of God, and they're just humans like everybody else. But like, I never realized it is like a celebrity culture, and you do the little things you do, like the things that happen when the cameras are shut off, because yeah, they live stream their services. And yeah, they don't show everyone sitting down and then standing up when leaders walk in. They don't show that part, and it's like little things like that they keep hidden. Or when the cameras are off and everyone's standing around hoping to say goodbye to the leaders as they leave, little things like that. So they're also big on giving honor. So where you give honor to God and who's ahead of our lives. But yeah, it's something that is drilled into, us, like, and the big scripture is like, well, you give honor to whom honor is due. And, you give honor to the ones that God's chosen vessels. Cause it's like, you give honor to God, you give honor to leaders, and you give honor to their family, which is considered the first family. So I don't know how much that's still in practice in the Kojak church, because the leaders both came out of that particular denomination, and their church themselves is non-denominational. But it's interesting that you said if you claim 501c, you have to have a board, because technically when they started this school, a few years later, they said, we're going to have an academic advisory board for the school. And it's like pretty much just everyone that has a degree. So my ex-husband's on there because he has his doctorate. And then some of the other people on that board have like masters and stuff. But I wonder now, because they'll go in and have their meetings. And my ex-husband has told me like what they've talked about like after the meetings. Ultimately, ideas are passed around, but the final say is still what leadership says. But I wonder if they created that because they had to have a board, and they use that as like, oh no, we have a board. We have somebody that we're accountable to, as like kind of like a facade.
They're presenting Uncle Sam with the list of names that they need to present, but it's a completely different dynamic. And then you see there's like zero oversight.
Yeah.
Yeah, very interesting.
But I mean, I know you brought up your husband and that you wanted to go home, your mother's passing being a major catalyst for that. When you felt that urge to go home and you had that experience, you were away from that space, completely translocated back around your community, back around your family. And that seed was planted like, I want to be here. I want to be here in this area. And then you go back to Vegas and you express that, and you're trying to leave, you're trying to get out. Do you start to see the people differently coming back after your mom's ceremony?
I think that's one of the things that made it kind of hard because, I mean, when you say people, you mean like the members of the church or the
In the church.
leaders?
Whoever. Yeah.
Yeah, I think, that's always been a little challenging when I did come back because at that time, yeah, I'm sure now before I left, when I was closer to pastor's daughter, I think I would have had more support from like the congregation. But, I mean, when I came back, I think that's when I started not feeling as connected. And
Mhm.
over the years, because that was so early on, that was in 2011, we moved to Vegas first in 2008. So, just a few years later, definitely as time went on, you start kind of feeling more connected to the congregation and you start feeling like you're part of the
Mhm.
community. That happened again when my best friend in the ministry, she had a severe form of sickle cell and she ended up passing away from double pneumonia. She's like the kind of friendship I have with her is that one that they say you only get one best friend in life. We just had an
Yeah.
understanding.
Oh,
She
yeah.
could be open with her experience. That could be open. And I remember there was a time where I was kind of struggling and I wasn't coming to church, and she was like, basically like, I need you. Like if you don't come to church, I don't know what I'm gonna do. Type of thing. And that's just the kind of
Mhm.
friendship we had.
Mhm.
But when she
Mhm.
passed away, it was very devastating for me, and I
Mhm.
felt like that's when things started tipping more towards me not being able to really, my experiences started changing because I remember thinking like
Mhm.
the family got a lot of like love and support, obviously, because it's their daughter and her
Mhm.
sister. But it was like I didn't get any support. I didn't get support from my ex-husband. I didn't, and it was like
Mhm.
I, as just a member of the church, was supposed to just keep it moving.
Mm.
But, she was like my closest friend and she was very
Yeah.
near and dear to me. Like we were in Lansing. I stayed not far from the hospital she was in because she had sickle cell. She was in the hospital like a lot for weeks on end. And I would be up
Mhm.
there almost every
Mhm.
day for years. I was just sit with her, just keeping her company while she was in the hospital, just being there as a support. But
Yeah.
it was like
Yep.
I had to go through her passing almost alone. Like I close to her sister, but not as close as I was to her. So yeah,
Mhm.
it just that kind of let me know like you're really alone. You're really
Mm.
alone in this church,
Yeah.
alone in your marriage. And I
Yep.
had friends, I had developed some close friendships, but I don't know, it just was different.
Sure.
And so, and after a few years had gone by, it just started being where, I guess, yeah, I started getting close to like the pastor's daughter, but it just at that point, my marriage was just beyond a point of repair. And that was the
Mhm.
bigger thing at that moment. That's really what pushed me to
Mhm.
leave the ministry was the marriage. I just couldn't, I realized I didn't want my kids to think this type of relationship is okay. I really did not
Right.
want them thinking, I didn't
Right.
want to normalize toxicity. So
Yep.
that's really what kind of
Yep.
pushed me to just make that step to go ahead and just rip the band-aid off, make that move. It was definitely interesting how at times I felt a part of the community, but a lot of times I did feel like alone, within
Especially
that
when you
place.
would have needed the community the most.
Yeah, yeah.
When was, because we've basically gotten to, like, in terms of the story, around the time that your kids are in school, you're going to church how many times a week?
It was then just Sundays and Wednesdays at that point.
Okay, so Sundays and Wednesdays, you're volunteering for the school. Do you want to talk about like that period of time to like when you decided to leave?
It just boils down to the marriage. So it was like
Yep.
I was volunteering at the school. So I was there every day, for the school hours. School started at 8 a.m., school ended at 3. So from 8 to 3, I'm at the school every day helping out. I would come home. My ex husband was very hands off, even from the time my kids were babies. I was up doing the feedings, because I thought it was more important for him to get sleep because he was the one that had to work. So I took the big burden of the baby raising, the feedings, the changing the
Mhm.
diapers, when they got sick, I was the stay at home mom. So when I
Mhm.
started at the school, it was still continuing that role while still
Mhm.
volunteering, coming home, having to feed them and then do homeworks, try to be there to help them through that, get them to bed, start it all over again. Saturdays was my one day to do like mom stuff. So it was like grocery shopping, getting stuff ready for the upcoming school week, church all day Sunday, and then, oh my goodness, don't let
Mhm.
it be a day that it's your week to clean. My week to clean, I was the only one who was at the school on my cleanup team to clean. So it was like
Mhm.
going to school gets out at 3, clean whatever responsibility I had. A lot of times it was like the bathroom, and then we stopped having to clean the bathrooms, and then it was like cleaning the school, the actual school. So like wiping all the tables down. That took like an hour. So I was like there for an hour after school gets out, run home, feed them homework. Doing that would have been fine if I had the support system. But I'm trying to volunteer thinking that it made me look the best. My ex-husband's complaining because, you know, Vegas is not equipped for a one-person household. You have to have a two-person household. It is very hard. It's a high cost of living. You know, just everything's expensive. So he had to, on top of his teaching job, which normally would have been okay, he makes pretty good money, but then having to do a second job. So he started Uber driving, and he would complain about how he's getting like stressed out and he couldn't sustain that kind of pace of like teaching and driving. So I started feeling torn between pouring everything to the ministry, trying to be there for everything possible. Let's see, I was ushering, so I'd have to do that on the Sundays and Wednesdays services every few weeks, decorating when there was like events happening, also volunteering at the school, and it just became too much. I just couldn't.
Wow.
It was just, so it was doing all that. And then a quick thing about the school is it's an online program. So they're doing this online program. It's very fast paced. It's like you have per subject, you have so many slides as far as the content of the information. And then they do a pretest, and then they do a quiz, and then they move on to the next section. And it's pretty much daily work. So within 3 days, all three had to have been done. So it's pretty fast paced, but the school still wanted to kind of portray this school like atmosphere. The people that volunteer, they're called monitors. That's essentially all you're doing is just kind of watching the kids, being there for if they have any questions on material, you know, essentially taking the role of the teacher, but not actually being a teacher. So particularly my son, math isn't his strong point, started struggling in math, and the math teachers just were not there to help. So I had to try to find him like math tutoring. We went to Minister Rachel because she's technically the principal of the school about for me to put him in tutoring outside of the school. She said that's fine. I was taking my son to this math tutoring place to kind of get that extra help because this was when he was taking algebra, and algebra really is building on the basics of, you know, like integers, solving integers. You have to be able to know how to, you know, add and subtract negative numbers in order to do algebra. When that tutoring place, the tutoring lab I found him, when they tested him, he was testing on basic math principles at a 4th grade level. By the way, the math teachers that were volunteering are also two of First Lady's closest helpers. Like actually one of them's called an armor bearer because the church is big on armor bearers, which are people that just are there to
had those too.
be at the beck and call of the leaders, essentially. So it was like getting frustration there where I'm watching my son struggle, not having any way to help him. I'm trying to help him as much as I can. And so it was that coupled with just the normal burnt out schedule, you know, just it was too much for me to do. Still trying to be there for my kids. The marriage wasn't, no support, no connection in the marriage. That pretty much is what led me to leaving, you know. So to have money on the side, I would do food delivery to make some extra money. Yeah, so I talked to my kids about kind of broaching the subject of, you know, I think I'm going to move to Michigan. You know, I'm kind of having a hard time just having that open conversation with them. And, you know, my youngest was about 7. So the next day after church, we're eating dinner and she's like, Mom says she's moving to Michigan. So of course my ex-husband looks at me like big eyes, like, what? So that kind of prompted the whole conversation, big fallout, big argument, you know, a lot of things said. And the only thing I regret that day is because I was in such a trauma reactive mode. I had experienced so much trauma and I had so many trauma responses from it. I didn't really handle my kids' reactions as well as I would have liked to now. Their obvious distress was kind of stressful on me. And so I, in turn, traumatic response, like didn't know how to handle that. So that was my only regret through all of this is just not really being able to really be there for them in that moment. You know, but that big fallout, I was like, well, I'm not going to go to church then because it's like just too much emotional turmoil that happened. And so they left and went to church and I was like, well, it's now or never. I was like, it's either if I don't leave now, I'm never going to leave. So I had to kind of, sorry, this part's a little hard for me. I had to make that decision. The end outcome I knew was going to be worth it. Sorry.
No, you're okay. Don't
Take your
apologize.
time. Take
Yeah.
your time. It's okay.
So basically I was like, I have to do it. So I packed up my stuff, jumped in the car and left, and left him a note. I left my kids a note, and 3 years later, it's all going to be worth it because I feel like the tides are turning. There's things I'm pursuing, legally that's going to try to get them out of that situation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it definitely was probably like the hardest thing I had to do. But I knew that it would get me to this point,
Yeah.
like, sorry, my journey to this point of like deconstruction, it like makes it all worth, it really
Aw.
does
Mm.
make everything, it makes
Wow.
it worth it, basically.
Yeah. Because, like you
Yeah.
said, I mean, you're kind of circling back at this point, and that's one of the conversations that we've had is like you deconstructing your, religious beliefs and, all of that is one thing, but even kind of as a separate thing happening at the same time is your kid starting to say, hey, mom, we don't want to be here anymore. We want to come be with you, right?
Yeah. So my son does not have a good relationship with his dad at all. My ex-husband's parenting style is very indicative of the environment that he's in. So what he's being, not even consciously aware that he's being controlled is filtering down along with his own psychological issues of having narcissistic traits. So it's like he's very strict, very authoritarian type of parenting style, which is also kind of indicative of the culture they're in. So you got like cultural teaching, cultural aspects, along with like psychological aspects, along with religious. So yeah, my son is he's been struggling for a while. I'm just now to the point of pursuing legally things that I can do to kind of get him here. And really my youngest as well, she's kind of, her thing is, because I just had this conversation with her like the other day, it's just her friends. When kids think about, I mean, Tahir and her sister had to do it, where you have to pick up and move literally across country. When you have your set of friends and you have what you've known all your life, because the church is very small, there's such a fear of like a little leaven leavens the whole loaf type of mentality where it's like, you don't talk to people that's not in the ministry. And even when people make mistakes in the ministry, kind of like this period of being ostracized because they need to do right and we need to see that they do right before we welcome them back into, hanging out and stuff. So yeah, it's been really hard on him, I mean, and plus just divorce in general.
Absolutely. And that's one of the things that has been hardest to see with your experience is the fact that, like you said, you took like the biggest part in raising your children. And I've seen, your children basically be your whole world. You were a stay-at-home mom for a majority of their lives. You have always had a close relationship with your kids. You've always taken the biggest hand and taking care of them. And then to watch that be removed, and then you have the kids out there still with a parent that has been hands off, that now finds himself in a different situation. You can tell that they've been conflicted about that the whole time, about, do we want to be with mom? Do we want to be with dad? And it's always kind of felt like it was never so much emotionally that they wanted to be with their father, but they didn't want to leave the church. They didn't want to leave their friends. They didn't want to leave everything that they've known. You've seen like the familial relationships take a backseat to the church, even from your own kids, really.
Because my son, one of the things he periodically brings up is, even when I said, okay, I'm going to talk to your dad about what you said about wanting to live here in Michigan, the first thing he thought was, what if he tells Mr. Rachel? What am I going to do if Mr. Rachel wants to talk to me about it? Because he's over his dad. He doesn't even want to, doesn't even want to be forced to have to come visit. He's like, if he wants to see me, he can come to Michigan and see me, which his family's here in Michigan anyway, so it makes sense. But it immediately goes back, because that's how we're trained. They train you to be so reliant upon them for every aspect of your life that you're afraid to move, or you have to be drastic and just pick up and move and completely sever that relationship. Which, by the way, I've had a few people reach out to me. The way I left kind of made it seem like, oh, she's visiting family in Michigan, and then I just never came back. So there's a few of my friends who are like, hey, when you coming back, we miss you. Everything is severed. So once I left the ministry, all my friend ties, all my close relationships were just, that was it, and that's kind of like an unfortunate part of the way that church keeps everyone just so close. And like someone leaves, oh, they don't have the favor of God with them anymore. It's funny now because now where I'm at as far as deconstruction wise, oh, I'm really like, I'm just a lost soul at this point. But so that is so true. That's very true. My youngest, she's like, I want to be with you, but I'm going to miss my friends, because she kind of got a little emotional when we were talking about it. And that's like the big thing, it's not even about the relationship with their father. All of them, even my oldest, she's going to be 18. She's going to be starting college out there. It's not even about their relationship with him. It is that tie with the church. It really just takes one negative situation to have that turn around, because if like something happens, like say my oldest is on campus or in class, and what if she meets somebody? It just takes one person taking a situation, even innocent, and kind of turning it, and now she's got a negative reflection on her, like, oh, you're being worldly, or you're making worldly connections,
all the shame, all the humiliation.
yeah. I mean, as it was, she's very active on TikTok, and she has online friends, on through that particular platform. And her online friend posted some picture of like a guy or something and made some kind of joke about it, about how attractive he is or something, like a celebrity crush. And she laughed at it and said, oh yeah, something real quick and innocent. But her dad saw it, immediately questioned her on it, then called her a hypocrite and said
my.
So right now she's a senior, so they do what's called senior sales, where every service they kind of sell stuff to make money for their senior trip. So he said that being a hypocrite, she's being worldly, and she doesn't deserve to do senior sales, all because of an innocent laugh comment she made to an online friend on TikTok that he happened to see. So it's like, if I took the church out of it, it would be not a question where they would want to be, And then my oldest even said, like, if they never moved out to Vegas, and if we're all still in the state of Michigan, even in the same city, she was like, oh, we'd be with you without a doubt. So it is, it's the church has that type of influence over their decisions, because it's all they've known. They're born and raised in it, essentially.
Yeah. Now you're at the point where you're trying to, get at least the two youngest ones into your care, your custody, the deconstruction element. Because I was kind of curious, and this is going back a little bit, but I know when you first left, I had even asked, because I still had, my religious, belief at that point. I had asked, well, are you like done with God, or do you still have a relationship with God? And I know you had said you had felt conflicted about that. So I guess I was just wondering, at what point when you left because of your marriage, did you start to marry that with your experience with religion through the church?
That process definitely took a while. 20 years of being essentially brainwashed, at least to the point of being repetitively given a certain narrative and having to build everything and put everything into this narrative. It really does make everything convoluted. And mentally, it kind of made me feel like I was just this big entanglement of like a slinky. You know how they get all tangled up and it takes forever trying to untangle them?
Yes.
That's how it felt. It was like, okay, so there's a line of truth somewhere in here, and it's like, how do I kind of untangle, everything wrapped up into it, this spider web, this vine, this whole mess of like, where is the truth at? And so I started realizing, well, maybe it was the church specifically. That happened pretty quickly. Once I got out, still was unable to say the word cult, kept on saying, well, they're very strict, they're kind of controlling. I danced around that word for fear of angering God, because like, what if they are well-intentioned people? And what if they really are thinking they're doing God's will? So it was like kind of this slow dance of trying to understand, where is the true experience at? And so kind of understanding that maybe it was the specific church kind of helped, because up north, it's kind of hard. There's not a lot of good churches up there. It wasn't until I actually moved to where I'm at now, which is like outside of Detroit, that I was able to kind of go to, well, technically Tahir's grandma, but my boss's church. And I enjoyed that experience. It's a good church as far as that same kind of collective effervescence kind of feeling where the music is good, you feel connected to people. The pastor preaches what he wants to preach, but then leaves it at that. There's no force of like, this is what I say and this is how it is. It's like kind of not as controlling. And so that's where I kind of was thinking like, well, maybe it was the church that was the issue and not God in general. But then it was like, you know, as Tahir did her recent like deconstruction journey that she started saying, it's kind of bigger than that. Like your experiences at Emmanuel's Temple is kind of just a small, you know, you should always say subcult of the bigger cult, you know?
Yeah.
Which is true. And I don't know. I think I just, maybe because it's been so much time. I mean, it's been 3 years since I left the ministry. It's been 2 years since my divorce. And I think that kind of also helped shine the light on how the church really is. That kind of helped me see some truths with that experience. Because my ex-husband was not kind through the whole process at all. He made a lot of insinuations. And even now, he still tries to, I think he tries to allude to my mental health, the state of my mental health as indicative of whether that makes me a good mom or not, you know?
Yeah,
I think
like a fit parent.
Yeah, I think in one of the court documents, he questioned my maternal instinct. So,
wow.
you know,
After being the primary caregiver,
right. I'm
like
like,
the
I'm the one that raised
all-star volunteer.
Yes. And then also too, through this whole long drawn out custody battle, he's like, you know, having this, oh, I'm this single dad raising my kids in the ministry, you know, my wife left type of narrative. And then he gets a word from the pastor. And this is where this was probably a big turning point for me. So the pastor's like, come up here, Brother Chad, you know, the steps of a good man are ordered of the Lord. Now shout for God. And I'm like, the steps of a good man. You're saying he's a good man. He's trying to paint me in this extremely unfavorable light with the court to try to gain custody. And the favor of God is with him. You know, that's when I started like, you know, that's when I was like, okay, it's not God, it's the specific church. But now I'm realizing, no, it is God.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that was the big turning point was I started seeing the flaws finally of the church, able to kind of reconcile that with like my experiences that I had and being able to say like, okay, that's where that I can kind of see that line. I can kind of see that truth. Now it's like, it's just religion in general, you know, is the actual truth of it all. But yeah, I think that's where I started kind of seeing the flaws.
Yeah.
You know.
And the reason that I'm asking about your own personal relationship with religion is because I know that you had kind of, you know, like you said, you were not sure about where you stood in terms of your beliefs and like your practicing of the religion. I had already known that. And, you know, we had not been in communication for a while because of, you know, some things that happened between us. But to me, I felt like the bigger picture was not whatever transpired between us, but all of this information and these things that I had learned through deconstructing and the ways that I had saw you kind of trying to like untangle yourself from all of it. And like the conversations that we had about drinking alcohol and, you know, like all of those kinds of things. And there still being that, well, like that guilt almost because of like your experience with religion, like just some of those kinds of things. I knew that like there's things that she's questioning about herself and about things that she wants to do that are perfectly okay, that I feel like if I share this information with her at a minimum, she'll be able to, you know, maybe relieve some of that. So I reached out and, you know, let you know, like, hey, this is what I've been doing. I sent you a Durante Lamar video. If you're not familiar with Durante Lamar, he used to be a pastor, a preacher who has deconstructed, and he does a lot of content on YouTube. He is like a co-host of the Daily Atheist Morning Show. But his approach and the way that he really talks about things and dissects things makes it really easy to swallow. And I felt like that would be a good starting point for you, especially the video that I sent was him breaking down hell, because even after going through my own deconstruction journey, I was still at that point where in the back of my head, what if, what if, what if? And to me, watching that video and hearing him kind of knock down all the reasons why it's not even biblical necessarily, and just really breaking it down to where you can realize, okay, it's bullshit, you know? And let that go.
It's just not coherent.
Yeah, exactly. It was huge for me. That was one of my big breakthroughs. And so I think that in particular is one of the videos that I sent you. So at this point, do you want to talk about like where you were in terms of religion when I sent that to you, and then like how that translated into where you are today in your deconstruction journey?
Yeah. So once I left, I still felt there was a relationship with God, but it was hard to find a place, to find that. I started going to the one church with my boss. I mean, it was nice, but at the same time, it was kind of felt like an indifferent experience. So kind of relatable to what you were saying, Tahir, with your story about how you kind of got to a point where you kind of developed your own version of like what religion means to you and like your relationship with God. And it did kind of get to a point where it was like, I'm just going to do me. And at this point, whatever happens, happens. Like, if the rapture comes and I get left, I get left. If the rapture comes and I get taken, then somebody was wrong.
Yeah.
It was hard to find what it was I was looking for. From the time that I left Emmanuel's Temple and I started being able to kind of untangle all that control and like everything entailed with that experience, it felt like there was a missing piece in my life. I was like, well, maybe it's a church. Maybe it's because I need to find, God somewhere, and let me try to find him, to where it was like, I'm just going to do me. And then whatever happens, let the chips fall where they need me, type of thing. So by the time that you had started sharing the information that you've come across, and yes, Durante Lamar, it's because he really relies on a lot of sociological explanations for what's happening in the church. He uses a lot of terminology. He uses, a lot of psychological terms. And I'm a very analytical person. So that's just how I operate. I'm not abstract. I like concrete information. I like facts. So it immediately started making sense to me, especially when he relates it to, I think he's got similar like Pentecostal background, as far as like being filled with the Spirit and all of that. So he started being able to explain what's happening sociologically or even, psychologically within our own minds. And then it literally, like, I'm not exaggerating. When I say it felt like a light bulb clicked on, it literally did. It was like, oh, that's the missing piece. It's the fact that God in general, like, to the point where now I feel like almost the writers back in the 1st and 2nd century, somebody got together, probably some Caucasian men, and was like, we're going to deceive. We're going to create this mass deception to keep control of people because we want them subjugated. Everything Tahir said, I like gleaned, I like grabbed it. She said, check out this book, Christ Before Jesus. I ordered it, listened to it, because it's like, that's what I was looking for. And even now I'm trying to, even in the deconstruction journey, it's still a journey because it's still accepting the fact that everything I've known literally my whole life, I have to kind of reconstruct that mindset to where it's like, I have to be okay with saying, even now it's hard to say like there is no God. So to take on a complete like atheist approach where there is no God. That's why I like how you guys say, well, Tahir says agnostic atheism. It's more of like contributed to the Christian God. That's why I kind of like, okay, and the God in the sense of the Christian religion is non-existent. Like that's easy for me to say because everything seems to be to that particular part, all the churches, all the denominations, it all stems from the basic Protestant belief.
Yeah. So like what you're talking about here really does make a lot of sense and is really aligned with other kinds of trains of thought in other fields, especially like in psychology, where it's like naming things is a form of grounding. To name it, like to be able to see things for what it is, but to be able to name it. And there are terms like cult and religious psychosis, right? There are terms that are used to describe different elements of religious phenomenon. And as we are trying to, first of all, work through the shell shock of everything that you've been through, and then you're trying to, sort through the memories about, what is real, what is current, what makes sense to me now. It really is a source of empowerment to learn the names of terms, to understand that you aren't the only one that's gone through this. As a matter of fact, so many of people have gone through this that we actually have names for these kinds of events. And so
Yeah.
it can help with that sense of isolation. And it can also help with that sense of you've lost the only thing that you've been taught to be the truth, to be able to find those stepping stones like, "Oh, no, I actually can know things. I actually can know things that are, tried and true outside of the doctrine, outside of the faith." It really does help you rebuild your confidence as a person of reason, as a person of rationality, but it also helps you to just really get sort of grounded in this broader context of like, oh, it wasn't just my church or it wasn't just my walk that I just messed up on. This is an actual phenomenon. This is an
Hmm.
actual issue. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's definitely true. Having to go through things like with my kids and their dad and custody stuff and legal stuff, there's definitely a new sense of empowerment. So it's one thing to I've had to kind of work through a lot of my mental health journey as far as accepting the things that I did experience. And having to be okay with saying that I was a victim of abuse. It was physical,
Mhm.
emotional, verbal abuse, because that took a minute to get used to too.
Mhm.
Like, no, he was, it's like a classic like mentality of people coming out of traumatic situations like that.
And then you add a
Where
level of religion on top of it. Like, that's a man of God.
yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yep.
it's very true that I had to kind of work through the natural, like mental health part of it as far as coming out of that traumatic,
Mm-hmm.
situation of the marriage and everything, to where now it's like, okay, now I can kind of do even more work and kind of disentangle from religion as a whole. And
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I guess I kind of think of like sci-fi movies, or I don't know, where you see people all kind of like in a storm and you're kind of standing outside of the storm and you're just watching them in this storm, is kind of what I feel like.
Mhm.
He doesn't have any effect over me anymore because he's in this whole place that I am no longer. It's
Mhm.
like I see the light. I guess it's kind of like
Mm-hmm.
he's
Yeah.
still in this darkness. I'm in this light now. And like before, I was working through him not having that kind of effect over me as far as like my trauma responses. But now
Mhm.
it's even greater than that, to where it's like, poor thing stuck in this religious, mind, this religious control type of
Mhm.
thing, where it really
Yeah.
does make me feel like I'm way more of a bigger person because I'm able to see what we've been taught as what it really is, as just this mass like deception almost. It's just
Mm-hmm.
this
Mhm.
untruth.
Yeah.
Yeah, and once you see it, you can't unsee it.
Right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I was going to say, too, it's almost like your dynamic flipped because before you had that guilt of maybe doing something wrong, you were looked down on, you were backsliding, all of these things that made him this godly man, superior to you. Now you flipped it where all of the reasons that you were less than him are completely removed now. And now you're on a
Hmm.
level playing field. You're two people, two parents, and the reality of your situation is the reality of your situation without the religious aspect playing into it whatsoever.
For sure. It definitely feels like that, which
Mm-hmm.
is very nice. you
Yeah.
know.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's like
Mhm.
a kind of empowerment that comes with deconstructing.
Hmm.
Mhm. Something I wanted to circle back to when it comes to you mentioned that there are a couple of like phrasings that are hard for you to say out loud, although you're working internally with the idea, like the meta concept of it, just landing on that final phrasing. It can be a bit tricky, especially as you're like getting resettled into your nervous system and, dealing with the shell shock of everything that you've been through. So something that really helped me is turning the phrases around, and instead of stating, things definitively like there is no God, I tend to lean more towards I don't believe in the God of the Bible. And it can sort of help assuage those programs that might be running in the background that are saying things like, well, what if you're wrong? The Pascal's wager, da
Mm-hmm.
da da. And another thing that helped me too, when I kind of found that phrase, I don't follow the God of the Bible, what came out of that was the realization that the God of the Bible can't really do anything without people.
Mm-hmm.
And
Hmm.
so, because God needs human intervention for I mean, pretty much everything.
Mm-hmm.
And there are a lot of things in the Bible that are attributed to God, like with the plagues, but even still, it took Moses having to go into Egypt, right? So there's always a human component to it.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and that's if you want to believe in the stories of the Bible. You know, the fact that we still have a children's hospital for cancer, there are just things that are not happening despite humans trying to do what they can to prevent or alleviate these very specific forms of suffering. When I say things like, I don't believe in the God of the Bible, I recognize that this deity is really powerless in this plane, in this earth
Mm-hmm.
plane. And if you're waiting for me to die so you can catch me on the other side with some sort of gotcha, I've spent the rest of my life divesting my energy and recalling and retracting those energies.
Mm-hmm.
So I will say that the more that you divest, you find those programs that are still running. Where are the residual things? Where are you still, sort of holding on to those belief structures? And you start to change those and affirm yourself and empower yourself and attribute all of the power that you were offloading onto some third party. You're now reclaiming that for yourself. You're empowering yourself and you're seeing the manifestations that you yourself are now creating and that
Mm-hmm.
you have been creating. I mean, it's been you the whole time. But even as you, sort of step more into yourself as someone that is creating a life for yourself, creating a world for yourself, creating something that you want to pass along to your kids, you divest from that sort of Yahweh protocol. He doesn't
Mm-hmm.
have the power to send you to hell because you revoke that permission. And even if you die and on the other side, you're walking through this pantheon of all the gods that ever existed and you see little piddly ass Yahweh, whatever the hell he's doing,
Mm-hmm.
there's no power there because you've withdrawn it. You've pulled it back.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But saying something like God doesn't exist, that opens up other kinds of pathways for conversations. But talking from a personal dynamic that I don't believe in the God of the Bible, it opens up new sets of pathways where you can begin to assert yourself as someone who is empowered to make a choice to create the kinds of experiences that you want to have.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I like about that phrasing, that I have a choice.
Yeah, you've actually spoken to both of you where I am, myself in the journey is like when I realized, okay, I'm atheist in that I don't believe in the God of the Christian Bible. There's just, all of the reasons.
The Quran.
Or the Quran. There's just
Muslims can get it too.
Yeah, exactly. I don't believe in that God, right? But can I say wholeheartedly, maybe it's still the little pieces of indoctrination or, because I grew up both Native American and, Christian, there's still that piece of me that cannot yet maybe or will ever maybe be able to say there is no God, period. There's nothing. So I like agnostic atheist because I can say I'm atheist to the God of the Abrahamic God, but I'm agnostic to the idea of a God because I am acknowledging that there's things that we can't ever know. Like that's just the reality. But do I think that I'm in trouble in terms of like, am I going to end up in hell? No, absolutely not. And to the, Pascal's wager of it all, if we're wrong and this is the one that is right out of all of the other religions, all of the other, teachings and what have you, if Christianity is the one which through Christ before Jesus, even still to this day, I'm still learning is not possible. But if so, based on the Yahweh in the Bible, I would stick my middle finger up to that guy anyway, because he ain't shit. Like you said, anything that he's ever done has been through the hand of someone else. And he, is pro-slavery. He's pro-killing babies and, all of the other things. And so it's like, on one hand, it's like, this guy ain't shit, fuck this guy. But then also, too, all of the coolest people that I know today would probably be in hell. So, you know what? Guess we're having a party in hell,
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
Oh, yes.
Exactly.
It's funny that you mentioned the concept of Pascal's wager, because the pastor's wife used to always say, if we're wrong, if by some chance, because no, obviously no one knows who's right or wrong unless you're dead and you have a way to come back and tell us. But yeah, she always used to say, wouldn't you rather be safe than sorry? Like, wouldn't you rather have this devoted life to God / the ministry and then find out like you're wrong? I guess maybe she had that concept of like her version of Pascal's wager,
or knew exactly what it was, because it is a Christian apologetic.
So yeah, but I'm like, I would rather not, because that brought me nothing but pain. And that to choose a life of that type of level of devotion, knowing all the things that it's required of me, it's not worth the cost. The cost isn't worth it.
You're right. It costs a lot.
Yeah. So I would much rather party and hell with you guys.
Exactly.
My drink.
Exactly. You and your journey, and which is really what, a few weeks at this point, a month.
I know, that's what I'm like. It shocks me, but I'm an analytical person. So if it makes sense, it's like it makes sense. And that's why it was so easy for me to grasp this concept of the flaws of the Christian God because of the flaws of the Bible, even with the flood. So all of humanity came from just Noah's 2 sons and their wives, because then you're like, and then there's got to be interbreeding, because sisters and brothers had to have married sisters and brothers. So you just start kind of breaking down major inconsistencies for sure.
Absolutely. It's just been really nice to see, and I'm glad you're here, and now you have too this added strength as you go forward in your own journey, and so I'm happy for you, what this means for you going forward.
I'm so proud of you.
Yeah, that too. Way to go, because there was a time where our family did not think, nobody ever thought that you would leave that church. And I don't think anyone would have ever thought that you would, walk away from the religion in total. So I'm also proud of you. Way to go.
Well, Tahir, you said in your episode, if there's anything you ever want to do is just bring the light to your family. And it's like, I told you, it's trickling down, because now my son, I had a good conversation about deconstruction. He's opening his mind to like other things. Because, he has asked me about like, well, what about stuff that happens with this? Or what about when people experience these, seemingly supernatural experiences? And I was like, well, I don't know. Maybe is it our minds? Because I do know that our minds are extremely powerful machines. So if there's something we want to see, it will make a way for it to happen.
100%.
There are benefits to exploring belief systems, whether you want to call it energy or the supernatural, or Buddhism often comes to mind. There are a lot of things out there, and I don't think that it's inherently harmful to want to explore that or to want to integrate practices into your own life. Biggest thing for me is, what effects are we trying to create onto the world, and where does our own role of compassion for ourselves and compassion for other people. And that to me is far more interesting to explore than what some dead white people wrote in a book 6,000 ago.
Yeah.
So do you feel like we're pretty caught up to where you are today?
Yes, I think so. Yep.
Okay. All right. So this is the point where we have some questions that kind of explore a little bit more about, now that you're on the other side, what does life look like for you going forward? So the first question I have for you, what are you most proud about?
I am most proud of the fact that I am here. I'm at this point. I have worked through what I needed to work through. I have the courage to work towards the things I need to work towards, but it's that I'm like here at this present moment.
Okay.
So I guess you kind of answered this next question. What internal changes have you observed?
Yeah. So now it's even easier to really, I've always tried to be a positive person. I've always tried to, make every interaction I have with people a positive one, because you never know. That just might be the psychologist in me, where it's like, one smile can make somebody's day, they always say. So anything I'm doing, I try to have an upbeat personality. But now knowing that it's not so much about a Christian God, but it's about your energy and what you're putting into the atmosphere. I'm all about positive vibes. It's like that's my focus now, is enjoying this life for what I have, the time and the experiences I have to gain from it. Also just sending out the most positive vibes that I can, however it may affect, atmospherically, or whatever how it may affect their own energy, just that's kind of like my focus now.
Yeah, I love that. I'm very much the same way, I think. Just in terms of, the one tangible thing that we have is this life. So what do you still think you want to learn?
Now I kind of want to know more about the Bible. Not that I'm trying to be like this big debater,
Isn't that ironic?
But no, it is just like, because I do know, like, sometimes when some of these fellow community members have their lives and they want to like have people come up, because I've been in the church for so long and I know all of the arguments that Christians use, I kind of like want to play devil's advocate, So I think I definitely want to be able to know the Bible in and out, just to play that devil's advocate. Not that I am, believing it, but just because if it can kind of shed some light on the inconsistency that is in it, maybe it will help somebody, that's at that struggling point of like, well, man, I'm starting to question things don't make sense, what does that mean?
Yeah.
Because I do know that, like, when some of these debates are going on, I know some of the Christians, that try to come up and try to like debate their Christian belief, they get into a lot of technicalities about the Bible. But it's like, you're not supposed to, the Bible's not to pick and choose. So if you accept Jesus as the Lord and Savior, then you have to accept the Bible as the manuscript for us to follow. So it's not even as deep as knowing the original Aramaic language that the Bible was written, or whatever language it was written in. It's as basic as a scripture that Paul wrote. Well, did Paul really write that? If he didn't really write that, then why is it in there? Paul's the one that did all of the do's and don'ts. All the writings to the specific churches that he wrote, that's where you get like, don't converse with people that are not part of your religion. Majorly paraphrasing. But the drinking, or they don't say the word homosexuality, but they say, the effeminate spirit, or they talk about a man laying with a man, those types of scriptures that they try to use to back up their claims. I kind of want to remember that more, to be able to say, well, it's one or the other. If inconsistencies that exist, but you still claim that Jesus is Lord, that's kind of what intrigues me, like, right now.
Who or what inspires you?
Honestly, the community members inspire me. I think everyone collectively that I've come across, including Tahir, is inspiring. I think it's
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm like the type of person that just likes to learn information. So if I'm learning information from somebody, I get very thankful. And so I think honestly, you all inspire me, really. I think that I'm just learning from all of your guys' deconstruction journey that is helping me through my own, deconstruction and then reconstructing journey.
What is your passion?
Learning. I like to learn as much as I can. I like new experiences. I think it's just because I am analytical, I don't like to be misinformed. So I like to, if I'm going to say something, I like to make sure I have research to make sure that what I'm saying is coming across as accurate. So I definitely have a passion for learning and growing.
You can tell we are kin. I feel the same way.
I'm finding out, another thing I'm open to as I deconstruct is accepting that astrological signs have some validity to it. That's always been frowned upon with the church, like, oh, that's like Satan stuff. That's the devil's. But it does. All of our astrological signs, they describe our personalities. That's all it is. Because it describes everyone's personalities, it guides you with who you are most compatible with. When I'm really connecting with someone, I love learning what the astrological sign is, because there are people I have gotten along with very, very well and very, very easy. And then there are people I have not. And typically the ones I have not are the ones that are not compatible with Geminis.
Yeah, I definitely, at a minimum, think that they're a helpful tool for sure.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I fully embrace my June, specifically June Gemini, to the max.
Yep, I feel that.
Yeah. What I like about where you're at right now is that you're able to explore something that doesn't attach the flames of hellfire. And I love that
Yeah.
for you. I just love that for you.
I love it too. I'm
Okay.
telling you, it was so freeing. I think that's why
Yeah.
I've been able to I just can't imagine working through this for 5 years. My
Mm,
personality is like, oh, it makes sense. It's a light bulb, it's a switch on, it's the missing piece that I was looking for that kind of makes
mm.
me feel like, okay, my perspective is complete now. My perspective is whole. And so it's been really easy to just fully embrace everything I'm learning as far as this journey. But
Yeah.
it's nice to be able to just freely explore things, see if it fits
Yeah.
me, if it doesn't fit me, but just free, not having
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
loom of what ifs and that dark cloud of kind of
Mhm.
always the whole angel devil on your shoulder type of thing, where it's like, oh, the devil's constantly trying to lure you into deception.
So maybe you kind of explored this already. Where do you find joy?
I mean, I find joy in just the moment. I'm getting better with my mental health journey. I was really bad because of trauma responses of like giving myself that moment of to feel. I'm getting better at allowing myself to sit in moments because it has been hard to have that kind of release. Just childhood trauma from a neglected childhood to the church's control and not allowing yourself to feel stuff and everything has to be pushed under the rug or you're feeling this way because it's spiritually related. You're not praying enough, you're not reading enough,
Right.
you know.
Don't have enough faith. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm just kind of now just working on just enjoying the moment, whether it's something I need to sit with or if it's just a little piece of joy, just sending out positive vibes. I'm all about vibing. I'm all about yellow
Yeah.
hearts now because it makes me think of joy
Yeah.
and it makes me feel, uplifting.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. I really, really like that all around. Even the fact that you were like, even when what I'm feeling is not so good, I am able to find joy in the fact that I can feel it and it's okay to feel it and I can work through it now. I don't have to push it down or brush it under the rug. And I love that for you. I really do. But what would you like to contribute to this community?
I would like to just contribute any kind of support that's needed. I loved being able to, I kind of missed the live when they're doing the fundraiser, but the
Mm,
next day I got on Discord, I seen people were talking about it. I immediately tried to contribute a little something towards it. Particularly the Deconstruction Junction community has been extremely important to me. Like I said, everyone's been inspiring. And so I just want to contribute whatever support. If it's telling my story on, your guys's podcast. Even now I'm thinking back, trying to be okay with certain things I said. If my truth in whatever form it is needs to be out there, if you guys think it will help somebody, then it's out there.
And even if that
mm,
person is
mm.
you,
I know, even if
Yeah.
it's just me.
yeah, exactly. It has warmed my heart to see, like I'll be in a live and I'll hear somebody, "Hey Trish," or it's nice to know that these people are embracing you open arms and it has nothing to do with anything other than the fact that they see you as a person and they like you.
Mhm.
Mhm. What do you hope to receive from this community?
It's nothing hope that's not already happening. I think just the support. I've already received a ton of support, been meeting some really, really beautiful souls. And it's just something that I'm just embracing with that. Just the support has been phenomenal. Just the knowing people are there. We're all collectively working through the same thing because we were all affected by the same thing.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
agree.
All right. Well, is there anything else you wanted to add?
That's the first time I've publicly and openly really said anything. I mean, I know the big part of it was like the church, but even just the things I experienced in my marriage. But I think just having this platform to kind of be able to speak that truth. The experiences that I experienced in my marriage because of the greater problem of the church I was in, because of the greater problem of religion.
And thank you for doing so. Honestly, it was really nice to hear you speak so openly about what you have been through, knowing that you have kept quiet for so long. So, you could have easily came here and glossed over a lot, but you were brutally honest, and I really do appreciate that. And I hope that you do walk away feeling some level of release or empowerment that you went through all that you went through, and here you are.
Mhm.
For me, I really like your example that you're showing your kids. what does it mean to be a safe person? And that means to recognize when you're not in a safe situation and to remove yourself from that situation. And those kinds of behaviors do speak louder than words because you're embodying the kind of adult that really needs to be there for kids, the kind of adult that really is the only one capable of truly being there for kids are the ones that can recognize those signs of danger in whatever form they take, move themselves into safety, and then start to embody the kind of character to self reflect, to be grounded, and be in love and acceptance of your own self. These are the kinds of things that I want to see passed along to the next generation. And that's exactly what you're doing. So, all of the power to you. That's awesome.
Yes.
Oh, well, thank you.
Thank you again, truly and honestly, for sharing your story with us today. I do believe that's our show.
And for those of you listening, especially those deadly aunties, please make sure you like, subscribe, and share your thoughts on today's episode with us below. Unless your name is Chad.
We'll catch you next time. Bye.
Bye. Ooh, Chad.